The roots of Epiphany can be traced to the spiritual philosophy of Father Adrian van Kaam. He was a Dutch priest who followed the long and tedious road of pursuing the truth. His 7 volumes on formative spirituality and 4 volumes on formation theology comprise the pillars on which the Epiphany Association is built.
To truly understand Father Adrian van Kaam and the depth, the width, the breadth of his work, we really have to raise up the notion, the thought, the word, relinquishment. What I mean by this is the following, and believe me, it is something that I have learned over the years, over the 40+ years of working with him. Each step along the way to fulfilling God's plan in his life required of him a distinct and profound experience of letting go.
Born in Holland, Father van Kaam enrolled in the seminary at Gemert at the beginning of World War II. At that time, Holland was occupied by the Nazis. In 1944-1945, what the Dutch called the Hunger Winter, Father van Kaam was entrapped in The Hague following the Allies' unsuccessful attempt to capture bridges over the Rhine at Arnhem.
We would have to utilize a bit of formative imagination to appreciate the depth of relinquishing involved in the move from creativity to chaos, from light to darkness, from security and a vocation to the priesthood to not knowing if you would be rounded up and deported to a work camp. And so I think part of what was going on there for him was an understanding of what he actually would later write about in great detail, and that was the necessity of detachment at every stage of life.
Ordained in 1946, Father van Kaam remained at the Gemert Seminary as a professor of philosophical anthropology. He became involved with the Dutch life schools of formation for young adults, dressing in workmen's clothes and bringing the gospel to Dutch workers traumatized by the war.
To go into the mills and factories and to do this teaching entailed a relinquishing of status. But then Adrian's whole life would be a relinquishing of status. For what reason? Because deep down inside he felt that this was his call. And it's almost like that wonderful phrase, marching to the tune of a different drummer, and not being afraid.
For much of the immediate post-war period, Father van Kaam furthered his education at the University of Nijmegen, worked with the Dutch life schools, and began a life in publishing. But he was never afraid to relinquish status for the sake of a new calling.
For all I know, he had invitations to continue the same work, but he was ready, willing, and not at all arguing against his provincial superior's command to go to Paris and literally, for over a year, bury himself in the archives of the Mother House of the Holy Ghost Fathers to do documentary research on the life of their second founder, the Venerable Francis Lieberman.
In the early 1950s, Father van Kaam was invited to the United States to teach psychology at Duquesne University. He left his mother, father, and 3 sisters behind in Holland and set about converting his textbook English to the English colloquial language spoken by Pittsburghers, trying to become a Pirates, Steelers, and Penguins fan along the way. He rose to head the psychology department at Duquesne and was personal friends with the world-famous psychologist Abraham Maslow. But try as he might, he would never become what he called a regular guy priest. In 1963, he gave up what many would consider a successful faculty career to found the Institute of Man.
He relinquished all of that status to form an institute that eventually would be an Institute of Formative Spirituality, that at first nobody heard of or understood. He had to let go of the chance to remain a popular speaker going everywhere in the country. Often I was on stage with him. We were invited in the late 70s and 80s to many places to give talks on the things we were writing and thinking about, and his name was everywhere. What happened then was a stunning example of following a call. When he made the turn to write his masterwork in Formative Spirituality, his 7 volumes, one by one, the popular phase of his thinking simply had to be let go of, since he was relinquishing popularity to choose the long, slow, difficult, and tedious road of pursuing the truth.
That pursuit led, from 1966 onward, to the creation of a body of literature on formative spirituality, as well as to laying the groundwork of knowledge to be preserved and processed in the Epiphany Association. Along the way, he helped everyone from U.S. Navy chaplains to university professors, to lay people, clergy, and religious. With the help of Muto and other faculty members, he designed, delivered, and disseminated experiential knowledge pertinent to the unfolding of formation science, formation anthropology, and formation theology. In the end, he felt the necessity of introducing a new science of meaning to a world already overloaded with sciences of measurement. In an interview, Father van Kaam explained his goals of spiritual formation.
My hope over these years has been to provide spiritual guidance for people trying to make sense out of life.
It's important to ask why he chose to call this life's work a formation science. That phrase was his way of articulating the mystery of being in a process of formation from birth to death, of receiving form and giving form. But why a science? Many people would critique that word in itself, especially in the West, because for us, mostly, we understand science as a science of measurement. In other words, positivistic, pragmatic models. Now in Europe, where Adrian studied, for example, in the university city of Utrecht, which Father Ralph and I visited when we made our tour of the Netherlands to pick up the pieces of Father Adrian's story, I remember pausing on one of the walks that we made and looking up. There, right on the door to a faculty department, was a sign which, translated from the German, meant the science of the Spirit. Then I said to Father Ralph, "You are not going to find that sign on the doors of most American university departments, because science means laboratory measurement or a contemporary understanding of science, like sociology or certain schools of psychology." But for Adrian, there was a whole arena of knowledge to be explored under the heading of Sciences of the Spirit. That was where he would locate his formation science.
Throughout his life, Father van Kaam embraced the writings of St. John of the Cross, who preached that the key to freedom was renunciation. When the end came, after what he called the blessing of a coronary, he experienced his final relinquishment.
So I often think of this, and in the end, the very end, when he passed over to the next life, he was asked by God to relinquish everything. He could no longer walk. He loved walking. He could no longer feed himself. Because of cerebral basal degeneration, similar in symptoms, but not the same as Alzheimer's disease, he could no longer formulate full, thoughtful sentences, even though other parts of his brain urged him to do so, especially when it came to reading and writing poetry. I was privileged to behold the peaceful expression on his face and the ministry of the smile, which he never lost. Amazing, but true. He never lost that smile.